You're listening to Get Abstract, the world's biggest collection of summaries.
This is a summary of The Crux, a book by Richard Rumelt. Leaders who face big problems and major decisions are a lot like mountain climbers, handling an ongoing strategic process of addressing one issue and then the next, often while trying to move uphill. Professor Richard Rumelt describes how multiple leaders have achieved the seemingly impossible by attacking big problems and choices with well-planned strategies. He identifies the core of a problem as its crux, the hardest knot, the most daunting issue leaders must solve to determine their next steps. Rumelt's guide to formulating and executing strategies for handling tough leadership challenges combines clear exposition and helpful examples, including his rundown on pitfalls to avoid. Okay, let's hear takeaway 1. A problem's most difficult element is its crux. Rock climbers view challenging rocks as problems and call the critical point in a climb the crux. Strategy in business and the military requires recognizing the primary concerns and hindrances that impede resolving the crux of a problem. Consider Elon Musk's ambition to colonize Mars. Sending a ship into orbit was costly, but Musk saw re-entry into the atmosphere as the crux, the core problem. Before his innovations, discarding a rocket ship in space was more economical than reusing it. Musk recognized that rocket ships are more expensive than fuel. To avoid the destructive heat of re-entry, he suggested carrying surplus fuel to slow the ship and enable it to land gently. In 2015, SpaceX's Falcon 9 became the first rocket to make a slow, soft landing, a process that cost much less than landing the space shuttle. Musk calculated that reaching Mars would cost $9 billion, less than a 20th of the cost NASA had estimated. Now let's hear the second takeaway. To conquer the crux, focus on strategy, not goals. A goal is not a strategy because it does not imply action. Netflix, for example, took a truly strategic approach in 2018. Having begun renting DVDs by mail in 1998, the firm shifted to online streaming 12 years later, licensing content from major studios. In 2013, Netflix started to produce original shows. Subscription revenue grew, but Netflix remained in the red. Netflix controlled more than 3/4 of the market for online streaming services. But content providers demanded more money, and some were jumping ship, shifting their content to their own online platforms. The cost of producing original shows rose as Netflix drew increased competition. But the company's existing international customer base gave it an advantage. New competitors would probably focus initially on the United States, giving Netflix an opportunity to build on its international advantage. Here's the next takeaway. Leaders can turn their strategic ideas into precise, unified action steps. Adept strategists spot which issues they must tackle. They don't rely on the fashionable strategies they see in consultants' PowerPoint presentations. They know strategy can't be a deductive conclusion that springs from evergreen assumptions. And they don't regard strategy as just a matter of enunciating a desired future state of affairs, though they may be ambitious about the future. Instead, wise leaders regard strategy as a means of dealing with problems as they arise. Identifying a problem's crux often turns out to be a major component of creating a strategy. Some situations lack a clearly delineated problem to solve, and your courses of action may not appear as readily. Marvel faced such a problem as it emerged from bankruptcy in 1999. It was a comic book and toy business, and heavily in debt. Marvel paid off its debt by licensing characters for various amusements. It could have licensed its characters for movies, but offers were low, since at that point there had never been a successful film with Marvel characters. Of Marvel's almost 5,000 characters, Hollywood sought only Spider-Man and the X-Men. Marvel licensed both to Sony, accepting low offers as the best it could get. Marvel's CEO saw the crux of the problem as the need to make Marvel's other characters more valuable. He did so by putting them all in the same imaginary universe and by raising capital for Marvel to produce its own films. Marvel's first production was the smash hit Iron Man, after which it produced dozens of movies and TV series featuring Marvel characters. This wise strategy created the profitable juggernaut that continues to fill theaters with Marvel films. All right, we've reached the fourth takeaway. Follow your strategy step by step. In building Salesforce, Mark Benioff began with a vision, designing an approach to new challenges one by one. When he started his career at Oracle, customer relationship management, or CRM systems, were evolving from index cards to databases to complex software, with functionality far beyond customer data. By the 1990s, these complex systems were costly to install and maintain. To reduce costs, Benioff considered the disparate parts of the problem, including the hassle of adapting a CRM setup to a customer's existing system, and then maintaining, updating, and troubleshooting it. Benioff recognized that the cloud offered a solution. A client could pay a subscription fee and log into a CRM system via the web. In 1999, Benioff left Oracle and raised capital for his idea, which became Salesforce.com. Anticipating resistance from corporate IT departments, he offered free signups. He expected large companies to opt in, but initially smaller companies provided more customers, so Benioff shifted his marketing to reach them. Salesforce took a hit when the dot-com bubble popped in 2000, but Benioff refocused on long-term relationships, raising prices for monthly subscriptions. Today, his software as a service, or SaaS model, has inspired many other leaders to develop SaaS products. Tony Ryan had a vision of offering airline passengers both economy and a quality customer experience when he launched Ryanair in 1984. However, a budget ticket and a pleasant trip proved incongruent. Meanwhile, British Airways used the London-Dublin route as a competitive loss leader, lowering its prices on that one route to keep Ryanair from being profitable. In 1992, Ryanair went bankrupt. CEO Michael O'Leary went to the United States to learn from Southwest Airlines. He discovered an even lower cost structure and a strategy of not competing head-to-head with major carriers. Ryanair reduced costs, lowering the price for a non-refundable passenger ticket while charging extra for food and baggage. The airline expanded into Europe, avoiding competition by flying to lesser airports. Within a quarter century, Ryanair became Europe's biggest budget airline, serving 40 countries. Okay, let's continue. Here's takeaway 5. Your growth aspirations may be unrealistic. Large companies may find growth difficult due to their already enormous size. For example, to double its size, Walmart would have to acquire Amazon and AT&T. But such companies can find realistic growth through new ventures or specific product lines. Data show that growth is random. A company whose growth suddenly jumped, for example, from single digits to 20%, would see a jump in its stock price. Then, if growth flattened, the stock price would plunge. To accelerate share price appreciation, surprise the market with new value creation. Bringing that value to more products or buyers is a strategic extension. Sometimes, less is more. Eliminating activities that aren't producing value exemplifies concentrating to grow. McGraw-Hill did this after the 2008-2009 financial crisis. The company got rid of all its activities except financial publishing. Initially, concentration reduced its revenues by about $2 billion. However, refocusing on financial information led to innovation in that field, where high margins grew higher. The company's EBITDA, earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization, rose substantially, pulling the share price up more than 20% for most of the decade following the change. A growth strategy can include mergers and acquisitions, or M&A. But be careful, because using M&A to inflate earnings is a bad idea. Misaligned incentives and arrogance often tempt CEOs into value-destroying deals. Acquisitions of public companies often cost as much as 1/3 more than their value. If you're competing with other bidders, you will overpay. Here's another takeaway. Diagnose a problem before you try to solve it. Noting similarities between your problem and problems that others have addressed can help your diagnosis. This can expand your point of view, which invariably will be somewhat limited. For instance, you may be prone to spotlighting certain elements of your problem instead of others. The theory of disruption examines how major corporations lose to upstarts with new technology who can put out less capable, less costly products that take market share from established providers. Executives find such disruption from below alarming, but sometimes the threat arrives from above. A year after the iPhone came to market, Morgan Stanley advised that RIM, which made the less expensive BlackBerry, had the best secular growth story on telecom equipment. That may have been true when businesses provided the equipment to employees, because BlackBerry had a secure network that charged less for data than other networks. However, when companies allowed employees to bring their own phones to the office, BlackBerry succumbed to disruption from above. Disruption occurs when the cost of responding to an innovation seems too high, the institution doesn't have the wherewithal to respond, or the disruptor is obliterating the threatened business's entire ecosystem. Organizations that don't face those issues also don't face a disruption threat. They face a run-of-the-mill strategy problem. Companies daunted by the cost of responding to disruption should do a cost-benefit analysis considering whether they should postpone their response and whether their existing business would wither. Companies without diversification plans should consider selling out to a diversified acquirer. The vanilla reaction by companies without the skill to respond is buying a company with the skill they lack. Now for the seventh takeaway. Having an edge makes a difference. Consider a winning boxer who might have a greater reach than his or her opponent. That is a competitive edge. Amazon's edge, for example, is its constant focus on its customers and speed of delivery. To develop a strategy that matters, consumer product companies need to understand what customers want and how they behave. In the 1920s, a Procter & Gamble executive mobilized young women to visit homes and learn how women used P&G cleaning products. Many leaders view scale as a means of improving efficiency and market share. Yet scale doesn't always make a winner. Apple produced only about two-thirds as many smartphones in 2019, for example, as Samsung offered. However, Apple's 3 models took nearly two-thirds of global smartphone profits that year, while Samsung's 100-plus models banked less than one-fifth. Most of Samsung's production was low-cost phones for users in developing countries. All right, here's the eighth and final takeaway. Sometimes a dysfunctional organization is the biggest obstacle to change. The very aspect responsible for an organization's success may become a problem in time. In the 1950s, General Motors ranked among the top companies, but by the 1990s, it had fallen from grace. Although GM entered a joint venture with Toyota, it did not learn important lessons from the Japanese innovator. GM had a pioneering innovation in Saturn cars, but could not build on that success. The structure and culture at GM prioritized fitting in, which meant suppressing improvements, efficiency, and innovation. GM's bankruptcy in 2009 offered the opportunity for the company to make necessary changes. At IBM, organizational fiefdoms impeded maximizing the firm's strengths. Following its founding in 1911, the company rose to prominence due to brilliant engineering. When new software-compatible machines debuted in the mid-1960s, IBM's growth surged, as did growth in staff at its headquarters. But its bureaucracy undermined IBM's performance, slowing approvals and hindering innovation. By the 1990s, IBM was on an apparently unstoppable downward slide. Wall Street wanted to break up the company. Instead, IBM hired Lou Gerstner as CEO, and he turned the company around in 3 years. Gerstner insisted that IBM operate coherently as one entity. He cut prices and downsized substantially, while selling or closing numerous businesses. Ultimately, he forced IBM's culture to change for the better. That was a summary of The Crux, a book by Richard Rumelt. Here's the 8 takeaways once more. Takeaway 1. A problem's most difficult element is its crux. Takeaway 2. To conquer the crux, focus on strategy, not goals. Takeaway 3. Leaders can turn their strategic ideas into precise, unified action steps. The 4th takeaway, follow your strategy step by step. Takeaway 5, your growth aspirations may be unrealistic. Takeaway 6, diagnose a problem before you try to solve it. Takeaway 7, having an edge makes a difference. And finally, takeaway 8, sometimes a dysfunctional organization is the biggest obstacle to change.
You've been listening to a summary by Get Abstract. For more summaries on this and related topics, visit our app and website. You're listening to a summary of Gods of Management, a book by Charles Handy. Philosopher Charles Handy compares today's dominant management styles to the qualities of 4 mythological Greek gods. Drawing archetypal inspiration from Zeus, Apollo, Athena, and Dionysus, Handy breaks down the subtle differences that inform competing approaches to management. He argues that today's managers face making the transition from a hierarchical corporate Apollonian culture to a more diverse democratic one. In this evergreen business classic, Handy posits that increased complexity and individualism will fuel a reign of new managerial gods. Okay, first, let's hear takeaway 1. The mythological Greek gods embody contemporary management archetypes. The ancient Greeks saw their gods as more than theological deities. Each god represented specific interests and values. People decided which gods they would serve according to their sense of alignment with each deity's symbolic emphasis. Today, leaders can choose among 4 different management styles in corresponding corporate cultures represented by the mythological gods: Zeus, Apollo, Athena, and Dionysus. Each god symbolically embodies different leadership views of influence, power, human motivation, change, and the future of work. Now let's move on to takeaway number 2. Leaders must understand 4 Greek god-inspired cultures. Use the power of these Greek god-inspired cultures to help you navigate different contexts. First, the club culture. The organizational culture that Zeus represents relies on divisions of labor with those closest to the organization's center, wielding the most influence and power, and all workers reporting to a central authority. Zeus-like cultures are pervasive in entrepreneurial organizations, investment banks, brokerage firms, and certain startups. This culture values speed over quality. In such organizations, empathy hinges on trust and affinity. Second, the role culture. Apollo's organizational culture embraces rules, flowcharts, and order. Roles have more clout than personalities in this bureaucratic culture, which values predictability and stability. Life insurance companies, state industries, and local governments embody Apollonian culture. Third, the task culture. Athena's culture calls on teams to identify problems, find solutions, and allocate resources in a continuous process. Athena, the warrior goddess, leads a loosely connected network of commando units, mostly autonomous teams working together toward a shared mission. Companies that thrive on variety or that are expanding, such as advertising agencies, consultancy groups, and those launching new products, adhere to this culture. And fourth, the existential culture. Dionysus, the hedonistic god of wine, rules existential cultures that attract those who want to rule their own destiny. Here, unlike in the other 3 cultures, the individual doesn't serve the organization. The culture exists to support individuals. For example, when doctors, artists, attorneys, or architects work together, they cooperate to achieve individual goals. Managers have less status in such organizations, where people view them as capable of tackling unpleasant, necessary tasks as a housekeeper might. Great. So now we can move on to the third takeaway. Each mythological god has a different approach to changing and managing teams and to setting incentives. Each of the 4 cultures uses the power of thinking in different ways and has a distinct strategy about learning. For example, a Zeus-like leader is an intuitive thinker who learns quickly through testing ideas and making mistakes. Zeus's club cultures value learning through apprenticeship. Learning isn't an open activity, but is carried out secretively to avoid the appearance of weakness. Apollonian leaders are analytical, logical, sequential thinkers. They view learning as an acquisitive training process that prepares individuals for new roles. Athenians value continuous learning and team approaches to problem solving. They see areas that need improvement as problems to solve together. Athenian organizations value individual self-development, with team members often bidding for new roles. Dionysians tend to be flexible thinkers who prefer learning through experience. They resent anyone who tries to plan their future for them and oppose hierarchical thinking. Each mythological god represents different management approaches to influencing, changing, motivating, and rewarding teams. Zeus-like cultures enact change by replacing people rather than transforming them. Those who know powerful people wield the most influence. Power motivates Zeus, who rewards people by expanding their responsibility in networks. In duty-based Apollonian cultures, change means updating roles, structures, or systems. Leaders reward and motivate Apollonian teams by expanding their formal authority and bestowing the status symbols that accompany greater responsibility, such as expense accounts and executive cars. Athenian teams change when leaders persuade their team members to agree to change, with individuals finding motivation in serving a common purpose. To reward and motivate Athenians, give them opportunities for self-development, variety in assignments, and results-based paychecks. Dionysians resent those who try to influence them, so approach any change as a negotiation. They regard being creative and improving the world as rewards in themselves. Well, so far so good. Now let's listen to takeaway 4. 4 forces shape organizations and their cultures: size, life cycles, work patterns, and personnel. 4 factors influence your workplace culture. The first factor is size. Larger organizations tend to be more Apollonian because their leaders rely on formal control and coordination methods as teams grow to larger than 10 people and organizations become more impersonal. Second, life cycles. Organizations that cycle through change most quickly tend to be Athenian. These rapid-paced organizations prioritize problem-solving over administrative capacity. The third factor is work patterns. Organizations can work by following several different kinds of patterns. They can use flow patterns, such as assembly lines, that use one section's work as input for others. They can follow repeated copy patterns, as in branch banking or gasoline stations, and produce identical work in each separate section. They can select unit patterns for independently operating sections, such as independent small businesses. Copy and flow patterns work best in Apollonian cultures. Organizations that use unit patterns tend to be Zeus-like. But they can be Athenian or Dionysian when teachers or other professionals work in collaborative environments. And finally, people. The generation into which you were born, your early experiences, and your environment form your cultural expectations and preferences. For example, today's individualistic youth culture doesn't generally align easily with the role culture of Apollo. Occupations that require less education tend to prefer Zeus-like cultures, while those demanding higher education levels are often more Dionysian or Athenian. Differences in personality influence your cultural preferences. An individualist, for example, wouldn't enjoy working in a team-based Athenian culture. All right, let's now hear the 5th takeaway. National differences contribute to variations in corporate cultures. Organizations develop different default cultures, in part due to their social and national contexts. When social psychologist Geert Hofstede researched the cultural differences of various nations, including interviewing personnel in 40 countries, he concluded that national differences manifest themselves most sharply in how people perceive uncertainty, individualism, masculinity, and power. In short, it depends on whether people approve or disapprove of hierarchies. For example, in Austria and Germany, people tend to dislike uncertainty. They value equality over hierarchy, embrace stereotypical masculinity, and are wary of individualism, making their organizations appear more Apollonian. In France, by contrast, people tend to enjoy power, hierarchy, and individualism, while eschewing risk-taking, which makes their workplace cultures more Zeus-like. These are cultural generalizations. Not everyone with the same nationality will share the same views. Leaders can strive for balance by using management approaches each of the four mythological gods inspire. For example, many successful organizations in the United States make their more Apollonian cultures viable by incorporating the leadership qualities of Athena, Zeus, and occasionally Dionysus. Different types of organizations tend toward different cultural styles. For example, in schools and academic institutions, Dionysian and Apollonian culture elements vie for control with Zeus-like management. Each mythological god represents enduring traditions that serve different contexts. Organizations that balance them offer positive lessons. Okay, now for another takeaway. Apollonian cultures inspire resistance because they're too complex, alienate individual workers, and don't align with modern values. As individual imperatives such as increased personal choice disrupt organizational imperatives like corporate growth, the dominant Apollonian cultural model must contend with three facets of resistance. First, complexity. Critics argue that Apollonian structures are too big to properly manage complexity. Apollonian cultures tend to work best when routine work takes place in stable environments. They can fail when uncertainty overwhelms them. Leaders with higher levels of education tend to better cope with complexity and the requisite abstract thinking. The second facet is individual alienation. Apollonian organizations can prioritize roles, many of which are mundane, over the growth of the people who fill them. Some argue that money is no longer a sufficient incentive for working and that this is a good thing. And finally, shifting values. Societal norms and values are changing to favor Athenian and Dionysian cultures that support personal expression and collective action over Apollo's impersonal conformist culture. While many people now expect workplaces to be more democratic, Apollonian leaders tend to ignore democracy. Top-down decision-making may be more efficient, but Apollonian leaders should realize that workers in societies that lack scarcity regard the cost of efficiency as too high. Now we've reached the seventh takeaway. Apollonian domination is ending as Dionysus, Athena, and Zeus prove emergent. To remain relevant, Apollonian organizations must change to prioritize the needs of the individual. Using federalism as a model, combining interdependence and independence, successful future organizations will resemble cities of villages or smaller groups that work together toward a broader vision. Athenian and Dionysian values will become the new norms, so organizations that cling to rigid hierarchies and stifle debate won't survive. Imagine problem-solving Athenians, Dionysian professionals and craftsmen, and Apollonians working alongside one another with a Zeus-like center uniting them in a common purpose. Today's emerging corporate culture operates on the basis of management by consent. Employees expect to be asked to perform their jobs, not told. The term management seems dated. Many professionals dislike the notion of someone managing them, since it implies control or manipulation. Organizations should no longer view people as resources to deploy, but as valuable contributing individuals with inalienable rights. Okay, so now we can hear the eighth and final takeaway. Organizations must adapt to survive as they replace their dominant gods. Organizations are restructuring and adapting to survive, resulting in cultures that no longer favor their old mythological gods. Societal shifts underway include the move toward a more Dionysian society that values credentials or other evidence of continuous learning and retraining, the decline of long-term employment and the emergence of a more contractual economy, changes to norms surrounding ownership in the form of cooperatives or discounted shares for workers, and new paradigms or assumptions about the nature of work in society. For example, women dramatically change workplace norms as they gain power and influence. Leaders must not risk dystopian scenarios in which people endure increasing splits along socioeconomic lines. which divide those who work from those who cannot keep up. If your organization cannot envision change, your competitors or industry disruptors will overtake you. Well, that was a summary of Gods of Management, a book by Charles Handy. Let's recap those 8 takeaways one more time. Takeaway 1. The mythological Greek gods embody contemporary management archetypes. Takeaway 2. Leaders must understand 4 Greek god-inspired cultures. The third takeaway. Each mythological god has a different approach to changing and managing teams and to setting incentives. Takeaway number 4. 4 forces shape organizations and their cultures: size, life cycles, work patterns, and personnel. The fifth takeaway: national differences contribute to variations in corporate cultures. The sixth takeaway: Apollonian cultures inspire resistance because they're too complex, alienate individual workers, and don't align with modern values. Takeaway 7. Apollonian domination is ending as Dionysus, Athena, and Zeus prove emergent. And finally, takeaway 8. Organizations must adapt to survive as they replace their dominant gods.